Hello and welcome to this short Skill Corner video where today we're going to be looking at our game intelligence in possession data and more specifically our off-ball runs. So what are the difference makers when it comes to our off-ball runs at Skill Corner? Well, first of all, we detect and capture 10 types of off-ball run. For every single off-ball run, we also know the dynamics associated to it, and that would include things like the speed, the distance and the threat of those runs alongside other variables. Also, we know if that run was targeted, if the player received the ball, and if they did, what happened next in that sequence of play. So what off-ball runs do we capture? Here we're going to see some animations looking at our 10 types of off-ball run, starting with a run ahead of the ball, where a player starts ahead of the player in possession, makes a run further forward to try and receive the ball. We also have a support run, which is where players start from behind the ball carrier and run towards the player in possession to try and receive the ball, to try and catch up with play. We also have a pulling wide run. This is where a player starts in the half space channel and drifts into a wide channel to become a passing option. We also have a pulling half space run, which is where a player starts in the central channel and moves into a half space channel to try and receive the ball. We then have a coming short run, where a player starts ahead of the ball and moves backwards towards the ball carrier. We have a running behind, which is where the player trying to receive the ball, making the off-ball run, is running behind the opposition's defensive line. We also have a dropping off run, which is where a player, often a centre-back, will drop slightly deeper than the player in possession to offer an easy passing option. And then higher up the pitch, we have both an underlap and an overlap, which happens in wide areas of the pitch, a player running either inside or outside the player in possession to try and receive the ball. And finally, we have our cross receiver runs, which is where players are attacking the box, trying to get on the end of a potential cross. So how can we actually use these run types for a certain football scenario? Well, here we're going to look at fullbacks who have played at least 8 matches in the English leagues in the 2024-25 season. And to start with, we just want a simple count of their total off-ball runs for every 30 minutes their team has possession. So what we're going to see here is those really proactive fullbacks who are offering themselves in various ways to try and receive the ball from their teammates. But let's be a little bit more specific here. And what do we actually want from a fullback? So we've created 2 metrics here. One is the lapping runs per 30 minutes of team in possession. That's overlaps plus underlaps. And then we also have on the opposite axis is support runs per 30. What we're then going to start to try and find here is actually 2 different profiles of fullbacks. We're going to find those almost flying fullbacks that want to try and get down the line in wide areas to receive underlaps and overlaps, but then also those players that prefer to support from beneath. And when we open this up to all English leagues in the 2024-25 season, we're going to start to see some players that we really start to recognise in those 2 categories. So towards the top of this chart, we're going to see the overlappers and underlappers. Kirkes, for example, Jake Bidwell, Brandon Fleming, players that we would recognise as those sort of fullbacks. And then when we look at the more support type players, we're going to see Max Lowe, Ryan Nyambe and Michael Craig. Interestingly, Livramento ranks really high for both of these 2 run types. So a really active player in terms of trying to offer himself as a passing option for his teammates. But actually, let's look a little bit more specific. And here we're just going to take those players who rank above average for their lapping runs per 30. And we're just going to hone in on one particular off-ball run type, which in this case is going to be an overlap. So when we just look at these players, we now want to look at their overlaps, both over speed and distance. So on the x-axis, we have the average distance of an overlap. And on the y-axis, we have the average speed of an overlap. And in the top right-hand corner of this chart, we're seeing players such as Tyreek Wright, Owen Dodson, Anthony Robinson, who are making long overlaps at high speed. This might suggest that these players are making these runs in transition phases, as they're trying to quickly get up the pitch to catch up with their teammates. But with Skill Corner data, we don't actually have to assume that. Every single off-ball run is associated to a phase of play in our data. So when we just look at overlaps in the transition phase, we can see that players that rank high here, again, are Tyreek Wright, Rasmussen, Owen Dodson, Sancho, Livramento, Anthony Robinson. So those similar players that we just saw on the last chart are appearing again, and we now know that they are able to make this run type in this particular phase. So we're now really starting to narrow in on the detail and the nuances of this particular run type. But how can we go a step further? So now if we just take those top 10 overlapping players in the transition phase and try and understand, well, how can we differentiate between these 10 players even more? So let's look at the percentage of these runs that happen at sprint speed. And again, here we can see Tyreek Wright and Anthony Robinson are able to hit those overlaps in a transition phase at sprint speed more frequently than other players in this particular example. What about the danger of those runs? So what percentage of the time when these players make overlapping runs in transition are they actually dangerous? And again, here we can see that Tyreek Mitchell and Milos Kerkez rank higher in this regard. Their runs are often dangerous. And finally, were they targeted? So when these players are making an overlap in a transition phase, how often are they actually targeted by their teammates? And what's really interesting here is that for most players, the percentage is 100% or very high. So that would suggest that when a fullback in England is making these overlaps in a transition phase, they're more likely than not to get targeted by their teammates. So it really is a key run for a fullback. But what we've done here is we've taken one particular off-ball run type and we've really drilled down and looked at the nuances and how we can differentiate between different types of players. Team A may want a very different fullback to Team B. And within those two player profiles, an overlap may well be very different as well. Some teams might want a player that can make long, quick overlaps, whereas Team B might want players that can make sort of short, explosive acceleration-based overlaps. So this will always differ depending on your game model and your player profiling model. And of course, with Skill Corner data, we have all of those details and all of those nuances for every single off-ball run a player makes. For more detail, please feel free to get in contact with us. Your local Skill Corner representative will be more than happy to talk through this in more detail. And thanks a lot for watching.